Hi there, and welcome to NewsNight. I'm Ladi Akiridoluale. Thanks for being with us today. Many Nigerians expressed disappointment with the news that no provision had been made for COVID-19 vaccines procurement, distribution, and administration in the 2021 budget. This was in spite of the fact that the pandemic had been raging for almost a year, as at the time the budget was being prepared and was eventually made law. So, how does Nigeria's budget cycle work, and what goes into its preparation? Who is in charge? And have previously identified loopholes and leakages been plugged to enhance efficient and impactful allocation of resources? To answer these and other questions, NewsNight talks to the director of the Center for Social Justice, Mr. Eze Onyepwere. Mr. Onyepwere, thank you for your time. Welcome to the program.
My pleasure.
Before I get to the nitty-gritty of the theme I want to take you up on, I want to ask you what your view is about a couple of trendy national issues. Let's start with the idea that the federal government has promulgated a law, the Finance Act of 2020, under which there's a provision that allows it to borrow, as it says, unclaimed dividends and balances in dormant accounts in Nigeria's banks. Should the government be able to do that?
It is fundamentally and morally wrong because it is built on a fixation, which I also have to link back to the legality and constitutionality. Now, in one fell swoop, the government says they are somehow more or less like taking the money as a debt. Now, before you create the situation of lending or borrowing money, there should be a creditor, the man who has the money, and there should be somebody who wants to borrow. And they have to agree on the terms before the lender passes with his money to the borrower. But here you have a situation where the person who wants to borrow the money is the one who is setting the terms. Okay? So it cannot be a lending or credit or debt situation. Then the other thing they talked about was that it was a trust. Under the law of trust, you can only establish a trust if a settlor, okay, establishes a trust of his property for the benefit of beneficiaries. So if I'm setting up a trust, I'm setting up a trust with property that is mine, which nobody's challenging me about or claiming. So how can you be setting up a trust, which you are the beneficiary, at the same time you are the trustee, and the property is not your own? So all the legal, moral, and social fixations that they want to build this on crumbles on its face. So it's a question of grabbing, okay? And if a government gets to the extent that it wants to grab private property without blinking an eyelid or without thinking it through, simply because there's a fiscal crisis, I think we are entering into very dangerous areas because we are not even talking about freedom of the press again or your right to hold opinion or to travel or to movement. We are now discussing about someone in the name of government trying to grab what exactly it has no legal claim over. If you cannot find money, okay, to run government today, and you are grabbing left and center, unclaimed dividends, monies in dormant accounts, at what point are you going to pay back? Where do you hope to get the money to pay back from? Because most of it is going into recurrent expenditure. It's not like we are investing it, assuming it's even a debt situation. The law says invest in capital expenditure so that that capital expenditure will regenerate and help you create the enabling environment to grow the economy, or even on its own produce sufficient returns so that tomorrow you'll be in a position to pay back. But if you are grabbing people's money simply to pay salaries, simply to continue running the lifestyle that those in the corridors of power are used to, because the key challenge is that we are in a serious crisis, fiscal crisis, economic crisis. Nigeria is broke. If it was a private company, the creditors would have sought to wind it up or to go for liquidation. But we continue, the managers, who are those in the National Assembly, the ministers, the president, the permanent secretaries, the top executive, don't want to cut down on their take from the public till. They don't want to reduce their lifestyle. They don't want to cut down waste. They don't want to cut down corruption because if it were a private company, the senior management will have taken some shave. So they continue business as usual. So that's why we have this situation where the idea is to grab without thinking of how can you pay back in the long run.
How about the one where you had the governors wanting to again borrow from the pension funds?
When you use the word borrow, that's where the problem starts. Can you borrow my money by fiat without my consent? Such a transaction is that I have my money. You want to have a part of it. You come to me humbly, not arrogantly, not like a master. You come begging. Say, please, Eze, I need this your money. I give you my terms. If it's acceptable to you, you sign up and we agree on repayment terms. Not for you to simply think of coming to grab my money because you think you are more powerful than me. If they have succeeded in doing that, that's not borrowing. They're simply authoritatively taking it. But it is wrong because, first of all, from the profligate nature of the governments we have in Nigeria, what may likely happen will be a repeat of the old pension story. The old pension story was that it wasn't funded. Government was supposed to pay at the end of the day. Now, individuals are contributing their hard-earned money. The worst thing that may happen is that when people retire, they cannot find the money they should have saved. In fact, already, a good part of that money is not there again. Because people started saving in their pension funds at the time the naira to the dollar was 150, 200. So if you saved 150,000 naira in your pension fund, you had $1,000. Now, fast forward to today, those monies people struggle to save are now in a position where if they want to access it, you need 400 or 500 naira to get $1,000. So if you had done like 10 million, which probably would have given you about 6,000, close to $60,000 because, you know, at 150 you have said
Yes.
$10,000 is 10,000. Okay, 1.5 million we have given you like roughly $10,000. So today that same money is just less than half of the value. So even to contemplate that somebody else was going to take the money, and when you need it, you can't even be sure he'll be able to pay you, is the height of it. So the idea of governors coming for the money, I mean, is something that if the thought should be perished. Nobody should even take it beyond the statement that was made. It shouldn't go further than that because that will be a disaster.
Let me bring you to the theme of our major discussion today, which is and that's why I led with all these questions.
Right.
And that's the budgeting process and cycle in the country. Because there are those I've spoken to who sat in the chair you sit in now, who said that is where you either begin to get it right or you get it wrong. Yeah. If your plan does not stand as viable, then every other thing from there on doesn't work out. What do you make of our own budgeting process? I mean, if we take it from 1999 to now, that will be about 21 budgets or thereabouts. Have we been improving year on year? Because I know you've been following this for a while. Have we?
There are so many crucibles upon which you can assess budget performance or the budgeting process. One of it is the issue of timing. The budget has to be timely in accordance with the Constitution and the Financial Year Act, which defines the financial calendar as a period between January 1 to the 31st of December. The beauty of such an arrangement is that it enables both the government, the private sector, and individuals to plan, to know that for certain, on such and such a date and time, this is what is going to happen. And then you adjust your own calendar, your own business calendar, your own social calendar to what the government has already said. So it helps and it brings some form of predictability and certainty into the budgeting and economic process. That's one. Well, lately we have started trying to get it January to December, okay? But it need not necessarily be January to December. We cannot, as well, the National Assembly can also stipulate another time frame if we think that January to December is not working. But the important thing is for there to be that certainty. But unfortunately, from what we've heard recently, we are still going back to that area that has some, some gray areas where the 2021 budget will be working, both the recurrent and the capital, and then you say you are carrying over the 2020 capital budget until the end of the first quarter. According to best practices and ideally, what should have been done is that towards the end of the year, all unimplemented projects which you want to continue, you now provide for them in the 2021 capital allocation. So you roll them over, not rolling them over by rolling over the previous budget to continue. You know that this project will take 5 billion and you have only been able to do 3 or 4 billion. So you now budget an extra billion in the coming year to make sure that you complete it. So that's one crucible. The timing aspect, we are trying to get it a bit right, but the constitution is also the problem. Because the constitution, both at the state and the federal level, says the president or the governor can bring the budget at any time before the end of the financial year for the next year. So the president, if ideally he can convene the National Assembly by the 31st of December, a few minutes before midnight, and make sure that he presents the budget before midnight, it's still within the constitutional framework. So we need an amendment of the constitution to stipulate a good time, because you can't do it by ordinary law because the constitution is supreme. Okay? So that we can have a situation where budgets are presented like, say, September, latest first week of October. And then the National Assembly will have 2 or 3 months to be able to do it. And that same stipulation should also say you must get the budget ready through the legislative mail, latest by first or second week of December, so that the president will have a week or 2 to be sure he agrees with what you've done and sign it up before the new year starts. So that's one aspect.
Right.
Now, the other crucible is of what I call the plan, policy, budget continuum. Budgets are opportunities for you to implement your plans and policies. There are opportunities for you to implement your laws. If you say we have a free education, free basic education policy and program, you must provide for it in your budget. If you are talking of universal health coverage, the budget must be seen to be going along with that plan. If you're saying that you want to do 1,000 kilometers of routes, it's got to be in your budget. Okay? So that policy coherence is something that has been quite lacking in our budgets from 1999 to date. You cannot take up, for instance, the agriculture promotion policy and look at the votes for agriculture and try to see the coherence. You will be at a loss because you'll be reading 2 different documents. The agriculture promotion policy will be saying something else, and what you see in the budget will be something else. So the policy coherence nature, issues around policy coherence, we are not finding that. Then the other issue is called budget credibility. By budget credibility, we are talking about government budgets being able to government being able to say, I want to spend a billion. And at the end of the year, you see them spending a billion or close to a billion. Or government saying, our revenue, we're expecting revenue like this year of about 7.9 trillion. And at the end of the year, they realize that money, plus minus maybe 2, 3, 4, 5%, because this is a human projection.
Right. So
we can understand. But when you have a deviation of 20%, 30%, that means that budget is no longer a guide to your actual expenditure or to your revenue. So in terms of budget credibility, you can see that our budgets over the years have not, each time we project that we are going to raise so much amount of revenue, we've not been able to raise it. We have a large or a deviation of 20, 30, sometimes 40% between our projected revenue and the actual. If you also look at the budget, because there are expenditures that are discretionary and expenditures that you must spend. Expenditures like paying salaries, especially at the federal level, we do pay salaries. Expenditures like paying back debts, servicing debts, we do them. Statutory transfers, we do them. Most times we do overheads. But capital expenditure, which is what touches the lives of every Nigerian, most times we don't go beyond 60, 70%. So in essence, our budgets have not been credible. That budget credibility, from the overall aggregate credibility to compositional credibility, has been a very huge challenge for our budgeting process. So if you want to come to implementation, you now begin to talk about procurement challenges. And then, of course, you get to the level of monitoring and reporting down to audit, which you can verify that the Auditor General has been saying a lot of things about very huge challenges with the way monies have been spent, not properly accounted, the laws and policies ignored when that should guide budget implementation. When it comes to time of budget implementation, everybody pretends that the laws are no longer there and simply does whatever he likes.
We'll come to that because, of course, that is an aspect that I want us to also take a look at. But before that, I want you to look at some other things that perhaps maybe talk about the credibility of the budget.
Yeah.
The famous word padding, which many people have interpreted differently, but also the question of leakages, repeat allocations for items supposedly already expended. This year you buy cutlery, next year you're buying the same set of cutlery for the same office, equipment and so on. And yet, budgets are scrutinized by virtually every committee in the National Assembly, presiding over one aspect or the other. How do these kind of things get past that level of scrutiny?
This question you are asking is with a firm belief that the managers of the system from the executive to the legislature have the overall big picture of the national interest at heart. If you come from that perspective, then this question will be very, very legitimate. But if you have been a student of looking at the budget over the years, you will understand that the conclusion you arrive at is that it is not true that those who scrutinize these things are looking for the bigger picture of the national interest. Now, when you talk about pardon or some of these issues, it's a very big constitutional and jurisprudential question, okay, about the powers of the legislature in relation to appropriation. Some school of thought simply say that the legislature should simply, more or less, they can look at what the executive have presented, but they can't increase, all right? They may even reduce, but they can't increase. They should simply find a way of juggling the figures in between, scrutinize it and approve of it. Others are also saying that, well, the Constitution did not say you must rubber stamp,
right?
Okay? That it gives you the power of appropriation, and that power of appropriation could mean increasing or decreasing. But what I think should be the proper procedure is not about whether it's the budget, the executive should have the ultimate power or the legislature. It's like a situation of a marriage, okay? The two arms of government should be able to consult and reach an agreement. For instance, you cannot simply jack up the expenditure without telling Nigerians or telling the executive where the revenue will come from. If the executive that's to make the money says we can only raise 3 trillion, for you to raise the expenditure to 4, you must tell us where we have to get the extra trillion from. So it is a question of collaboration, give and take. But my bigger question is about most of the times what you find like all these constituency projects. You know, we have legislative shadows in the Constitution.
Yes.
Okay, there's exclusive legislative list, there's a concurrent list. There is what is reserved for the federal government. There is what is reserved for state governments. And these are things that have to be respected in the process of lawmaking. You don't go and start legislating for what is supposed to be done by state governments at the federal level. Okay, it will not stand. Now, the question some of us raise is that the budget is a piece of legislation, so it should be bound by those lists. If you go and start in the guise of constituency projects that you are nominating primary healthcare centers, town halls, things that should be done by not even the state government, local governments.
Right.
Or state governments can come in. Now, most of those things, when you do the capital component, you cannot do the recurring component. If you build a primary health center in your village, the federal government cannot post nurses or doctors or CHUs. It is the state or local government. And most of the times, you are not consulting the state government or local government chairman before you put that project in the federal government, in the federal budget. So when you finish building it, what happens? We have seen a good number of them from studies. The federal government has finished building. But because the state government or local government did not have a budget for it, is overtaken by weeds and reptiles. It is not delivering the service. So some of us believe and are of the strong view that the federal government, through the legislature, through the federal budget, cannot be budgeting to provide services or construction or whatever that is reserved for state and local governments through the budget. That would be ultraviolence the powers of the legislature. But I don't think they are thinking it through. I hope you understand what I'm saying.
I do.
If you have legislative shadows, why are you going into the shadow that is reserved for the states and local governments under the guise of constituency projects? If the federal government thinks strongly about those monies that they need to do it, you should transfer it to the states and local governments. It shouldn't come by way of state budgets, federal budgets, because the challenge is that you can do the capital. I just gave you the example of a health center. You can put down the building, but the federal government cannot post nurses, cannot post doctors, cannot begin to buy the chemicals or the recurring costs. So at the end of the day, if the state government doesn't buy in, if the local government says we are not interested,
that's where it ends.
That's where it ends. You build the hard structure, but nothing will come out of it in terms of service to the people.
Many of these things have not been caught, and that brings me to what you were alluding to earlier that I said we would get to. Nigeria has a Public Procurement Act. It was a battle to get it because prior to that, it was best judgment, discretion on the part of those in authority at various levels. But the Public Procurement Act stipulated certain best practices and how to go about the process of procurement. Then you had the audit side. The Office of the Auditor General at both the federal and state levels complained about being, quote and unquote, deliberately underfunded by those that they are supposed to be oversighting their accounts. As a result, they are not able to actually do the work as outlined. Many of the things you've mentioned consequently don't get caught, and they repeat themselves year on, year on, year on. I'll give an example. I remember last year, towards the tail end of last year, the chairman of the Senate Committee on Public Accounts wondering how it was possible for an agency whose account had not been audited for 8 to 10 years to keep getting budgetary provisions in the succeeding year, because the law does not allow for that provision to happen. Again, what do you make of this? Because at the end of the day, we are starting another budgetary cycle now. We are in the early days of 2021, but it doesn't seem as if any of those things have been positively affected.
I'm saying that the Public Procurement Act, to a great extent, has been obeyed in the breach. And amendment by the Finance Act of 2020 has set a very, very dangerous precedent.
How?
Now, let me start by the initial violations. The Public Procurement Act provides for a National Council on Public Procurement, which is supposed to be the policy arm of procurement. Okay? The Bureau of Public Procurement is more or less the regulator and should implement policies made by the council. But since 2007, when this law came into effect, the president has failed, refused and neglected to set up the council. The council, I mean, it's not just the current president, previous presidents, they simply ignored that. And so you have a situation where the BPP is working and purportedly enacting policies, enacting precedents, enacting rules and regulations and guidelines, which the law says should be approved by council, but there's no council. So stricto sensu, most of those policies, regulations they've enacted are illegal because it was not done by the authority of council. Okay, that's the first thing. Now, secondly, if you recall, almost every Wednesday after the Federal Executive Council meeting, we are regaled with projects that are purportedly approved by the Federal Executive Council. Before the amendments in the Finance Act of 2020, which just took effect a few days ago, the National Executive Council, Federal Executive Council, was not mentioned in the Act. Is a body unknown to public procurement jurisprudence everywhere. Now, if you look at the country procurement assessment survey that was done between Nigeria and the World Bank as a precursor to the Public Procurement Act, it clearly stated that high-level public officials should have no business in public procurement. It's a question of making sure that the rules are followed. You have the procurement cadre, you have the permanent secretaries, you have people who are exercising oversight, definitely not the Federal Executive Council. Now, what has happened is that the amendment simply now brings forward a committee at the level of the legislature so that they don't need to come to Federal Executive Council. So since they are three arms of government, legislature, do your own procurement. They set up one again for the judiciary and the Federal Executive Council. Now, the implication of this, which some of us want, is that it could get to a situation where the Chief Justice of Nigeria, maybe who is presiding over the judicial arm, will be accused of procurement fraud, or even the Senate President or the Speaker of the House, because they are going to be the last set of persons presiding and giving decisions relating to procurement. And you can imagine the scandal that will happen. So this is the stage at which we are now. And they further increased mobilization fees from 15 to 30%. Now, why do you need to increase mobilization fees? Some of us feel it is fundamentally flawed and wrong. One is that part of what you state as a bidder is that you have financial capacity. What is financial capacity? That you can raise the resources to do the contract. And once you get up to a certain stage, of course, you bring your certificates, you process them, government will pay you. Now, also, you can imagine the scenario. The profit margin that you get after executing the contract may not be more than 25-30%. In fact, in many instances, it may not reach 30%. So if you give me 30% upfront for a contract that will take me 2-3 years, I will keep running around looking for money, organizing stuff. And if I finish in 2 years and eventually pay me, that 30% you've given me upfront is almost my profit, or is even higher than my profit.
For doing the entire project.
For doing the entire project. You are creating a perverse incentive. I could decide to elope with the money. Okay? Because if I elope at that stage, I am at the position I would have been if I finished doing the work 2 years down the line with all the stress and the hardship associated with it. So in essence, we think it is fundamentally flawed to increase mobilization from 15 to 20%. But of course, the National Assembly in its wisdom went ahead and did the amendment, and the president also assented to it. So that's a clear challenge with public procurement. Now, when you come to audits, there have been a huge clamor for a new audit legislation in Nigeria, because the last audit legislation we had was the colonial audit legislation of 1956. Unfortunately, that legislation was not reproduced in the laws of the Federation of Nigeria in 1990. I'm not even talking of the 2004 laws, revision of the laws of the Federation of Nigeria. And by that 1990, they said the provisions of that act have been superseded by the 1979 Constitution. If you look at the 1979 Constitution and the 1999 Constitution provisions relating to audits, they are virtually on all fours. So the same position we had after the laws of the Federation in 1990 was also carried over to 2004 laws of the Federation. But if you look at the provisions of the Constitution, they're scanty. They did not go into detail about how the audit process should be run. So we have a situation which does not make sense, which is antithetical to common sense, where auditees now set the resources that the auditor needs to do the audit. I am supposed to audit you. And the more resources I have, the more I come and look at your books. And you are the one to prescribe the resources I need. You are the one to give me money, to determine the number of staff I have, to agree that I need a new computer or software that will help me track how you are spending money. I tell you that I need a new software, and that this new software, if you give it to me, wallahi, nobody will be able to steal again. And you are busy. No, I didn't say you stole. You have either stolen or you are planning to. And you say, oh, let's say we'll bring this software to stop. Will you approve the money?
Of course not.
That's exactly where we are. In no reasonable jurisdiction does an auditee, a person subject to audit, or institution subject to audit, be the one to approve money to stipulate how much the auditor should get. And of course, the auditor is not just, the Office of the Auditor General, the law says it should be independent. It's not just an ordinary civil servant. It shouldn't be under the ordinary civil service. There should be an Audit Service Commission, which should be liaising with the Public Accounts Committee and the legislature, okay, to help the Auditor General recruit the right staff, make relevant regulations, propose a budget line for audit work, which will be submitted straight to the legislature. And so you have an empowered Auditor General's office, which will do a good work. And in some other jurisdictions, like in Ghana, they have it in the constitution that not just in the financial regulations what we have, the Auditor General will have the power to surcharge. So it's not a question of writing a report on a report. Here, what we are doing is Auditor General writes a report, sends it to the PAC. PAC writes another report after conducting hearings. Now, that report of the PAC is not yet a report of the Senate or the House. They have to take it to the plenary. And it's only when they accept it at the plenary that it now becomes a report of the Senate or House. Even that report of the Senate or House has no
teeth.
It's no teeth. It has to be forwarded back to the executive for implementation. And part of the audit report complains about even what happens in the presidency and the EFCC. The Auditor General writes that the EFCC, ICPC, presidency mismanages money. You still give back the report to them. What do you expect? So it's an exercise in futility. So we are thinking of a new audit legislation that actually empowers the Supreme Audit Institution to do its work, to say institution A or B has mismanaged public money, you've caused a loss on the treasury, you must bring back that at the pen of punishment. If you are not happy, you access a tribunal or special summary fast-track court proceedings that will end 3 to 6 months maximum. And it's ended, and then whether the court upholds his decision or not, everybody knows his fate where he stands. This one is that nothing comes out of the audit. Auditor General, in fact, some agencies deliberately refuse to report. What we are reading or we are complaining about is because agency A reported. So once you report, the Auditor General can now look at what you've done and make a comment. So if you don't report at all,
there's no opportunity to make a comment.
And unfortunately, the Auditor General does not publish a schedule of agencies that failed to report. Okay, in 2016, about 160 refused to report. By 2017, 265 refused to report. Because they have seen that the 160 that failed to report, nothing happened to them. Even the idea of naming and shaming them, the list is not available to the public. So the only persons who we are talking about are those persons who even complied, even though they have violations or infringements. So what have you given? Perverse incentive. If I sit there, I know I have a violation, and you are not going to publish the list of the agencies, I simply not report. I will not report at all. So that's the unfortunate scenario where we find ourselves. So we have always said that we need a new audit legislation, which will have a concentric circle of powers of, pillars of integrity. Now, these pillars, Auditor General's office should be there, PSC should be there, the media should be there. Okay, anti-corruption agency should be there, and civil society should be there. The work of the Auditor General is an empirical work. It's not a political work. You prepare the accounts, okay? You submit it to him when he comes. He looks at the finances and the accounts you prepared and says A, B, C, D was not spent in accordance with Public Procurement Act, financial regulations. He's not inventing any law. He's just looking at it within the context of policies and laws that everybody accepts. That you didn't obey the financial regulations, you didn't follow the Public Procurement Act. When he finds that, he gives you an audit query or calls for you to explain, which means he's observing the rules of due process, fair hearing. It is only when your explanation is not sufficient or does not respond to all the issues he raised that he now puts it in his final report, which he upscales to the National Assembly. If your explanation is sufficient,
it rests there.
It rests there. So what I'm saying is that anything you find as a violation in the Auditor General's report is a sufficient prima facie case with the ICPC, EFCC, Federal Ministry of Justice, the prosecutors there, the police can dig a little further into to be able to draft charges if the person is still not agreeing, to be able to draft charges and upscale it to the courts. So that's why I'm talking about collaboration. And I mentioned them, all of them need to work hand in hand to make sure that audit reports are not just lying down on the shelf and gathering those, but become instruments for enhancing transparency and accountability, recovering money. Part of the report we did the last time showed that between three agencies, 3 or 4 of them, they could not account for about 5.78 trillion between 2014 and 2017. An NPC, DPR, and FIRS. I think these are the 3 agencies. They couldn't account for the money. They were breaching the constitution, they were breaching the laws, and Auditor General keeps writing reports, and everybody pretends, including the president. The unfortunate thing is that the president is a minister of petroleum, and an NPC directly reports to him. So, Auditor General will come, write his report. And at the end of the day, if he goes through PAC and everybody, he's still going back to the same person who is in charge of the agency that is reported to be violating the law. And we are talking of 5.78 trillion at a time we are looking for money to fund our budget.
Speaking of looking for money and then this issue of agencies and the leakages that this process you just described has spawned, the reports are that more than 400 agencies right now, as we speak, are unable to pay salaries.
Great.
As we speak. And that about 1/3 or over 1/3, depending on which figure you want to pick, of total revenue that is accruing to the nation over the last 2 years or thereabouts goes to debt servicing. Another problematic area. Partly also because there's not enough scrutiny, it will appear, on even what qualifies as debt for Nigeria.
Yeah.
The National Assembly, the executive, and even the judiciary have a role in all of this. What do you make of this?
The latest report available to Nigerians is the second quarter budget implementation report.
Right.
And it was expatiated on by the Minister of Finance when they were presenting the budget and DEMTEF. We made 2.55 trillion between January and August 2020. And out of it, about 85% of it was used to service debts. 85% of 2.55 trillion we made was used to service debts. So what was outstanding was only 15%. So is in that 15%, the implication was that if you check out what is 80-something% of this amount of money, you are talking about 2.1 or 2.2 trillion. Yes. So only 300 billion, about 300 and something was left. And we paid salaries of about 2.3 trillion within that period. So we borrowed money to pay salaries. We borrowed money to pay for statutory or constitutional expenditure, the money we gave to the National Judicial Council for the Judiciary, National Assembly, INEC, National Human Rights Commission, public, all of them on statutory transfer. We borrowed money to give them to run, both for their capital. So your guess is as good as mine. We've also borrowed money for whatever we've done as capital expenditure. So the fear even going for 2021 is something that will make everybody shiver. We are budgeting about 3.3 trillion to be able to pay back debts, to service debts. And the total revenue we expect to accrue is about 7.8 or 7.9 trillion. And that revenue we're expecting, that projected revenue, most of the projection is overly optimistic in terms of from the historical trends and from empirical facts over the years. A good part of that revenue, maybe about between 60 and 70% of that revenue only may materialize. So we may end up with actual revenue of not more than maybe 5 to 5.5 trillion, out of which 3.3 trillion will go for debt servicing. So whatever we are being told that we have a deficit of about, let's say, between 5 and 6 trillion, the deficit for 2021 is going to balloon. It will even be more than the actual revenue. So if you make about 5 to 6 trillion and you're expecting to spend 13.5 trillion, your guess is as good as mine as where the bulk of the money will come from.
And this is exacerbated by the fact that the value of the naira, in which many of these debts are denominated, has dropped sharply over the last couple of months. You alluded to it earlier when you talked about it being about 500 naira now. So a debt that was $200 up to 6 months ago, which was only then valued at $200 multiplied by about 360, 370, 380, is now $200 multiplied by 505 naira.
Right.
But that money has already been borrowed and spent. You are talking about its value at the point of repaying it with interest. So what you're talking about now in terms of debt is not just going to balloon. We're going to have to keep borrowing. As at the end of 2020, it's estimated that our debt portfolio is about $85.9 billion.
Yes.
How sustainable is all of this?
It's not sustainable one bit, but we've got ourselves into a bind where it is like we're under automatism or compulsion to borrow. But I don't think it should necessarily be so. And that's why I made the point that we are broke. If we're a private company, maybe somebody could have said, liquidate the company. Now, when a company or an individual is broke, is as poor as Nigeria today, has a fiscal crisis, you sit down with your family or in the board of directors and the management and key senior staff and say, gentlemen and ladies, this situation is dire. Let's tell ourselves the truth. Let's have a haircut. If you have been following even football, a team like Barcelona is the big time, the big players like Lionel Messi and everybody is told to have, we cut down something from your salary.
Yes.
So why are we not having it done in Nigeria? Not for the poor masses who are earning the minimum wage, but for most of them at the high level who are earning big sums of money. Rather than trying to have that haircut, they don't want to adjust. So that's why we have this scenario. We have not sat down to tell ourselves the truth that yes, yesterday we earned so much. Today we are not earning that much. Or just even imagining that for the past 5 years, we've hardly recorded a growth that is as much as our population growth. So even if you are doing 2% growth and your population is increasing 3.2, 3.4%, you are not increasing. It's just like, check the family. You are adding children every year or 2 years, and your salary is just like adding 5,000, 10,000 a year in this kind of Nigerian environment. Definitely, you are on the reverse gear. You are not really improving. So what I think should be done is that it starts from the leadership, telling themselves the naked truth that we can't continue spending or wasting resources at the level we were doing it before. The music and the song has changed, so we need to change our dance steps. And then when they now cut down their spending, it will be easier for them to market the idea of tightening your belt to Nigerians. Because the days are gone when you sermonize and sit on Moses' seat like the scribes and Pharisees used to do, and then expect me to do what you say and not what you do. It's not going to work. That's why you have so much tension. Nigerians are seeing the lifestyle of their leaders. So any sermon about tightening our belt or cutting down does not fly. So when we see them take that first step, it's easy for the masses to queue in.
Let me take you in a slightly different direction, because the last statement you made had to do with leadership. And that brings us to core areas now, which are not necessarily economic, but there are those who say that when you solve the political questions, the economic questions naturally follow. There's been a lot said about the leadership and the contest that is coming in 2023. You are from the Southeast. You've just elected another leader for the leading group in the Southeast, the socio-political group. Do you think that with the way the politics is being played towards 2023, the Southeast, not the moral argument now, but is the Southeast playing the politics the way that could result in it having the goal of achieving the presidency in 2023?
I am not a politician.
Definitely.
But I must tell you something. You cannot remove that moral argument, okay, from who should lead Nigeria. Because a precedent had been set in the past, in 1999. Okay, everybody abandoned the terrain to say the Southwest should have it. All right? And this is 2021. It's been going around like that. So I think that it is not even about where you come from. We should try to get our best. And I believe that in every part of Nigeria, if you look through, you are careful enough, you can select a part of the first 11, which will lead us, let me not use the word to the next level because it's been very much abused. I pity whoever is going to take over from President Buhari.
Pity.
I pity. Because it's like what will be handed over to you is hot burning coal on your bare palms without any protection. If we are doing 85% of our revenue, using it to pay debt, what magic will you perform when you take over such a country? So you are just like, from day one, there will be no breathing space. The hard labor starts. So whoever is going to take over, whether it's from the southeast or wherever, is going to have hot burning coal on his hands. And that's why we need the best of our best to take over, to begin the process of reconstruction, to begin the process of renewal, to begin the process of thinking through problems and challenges. Now, if Nigeria is turn by turn PLC, why is it wrong for the Southeast to demand to have its turn? We have to sit down and say, how do we want to run Nigeria? The rules don't have to change. The Southwest clamored and got it. The North said, oh, give it back to us, it's our turn. Okay? So the rules don't have to change because you saw the face of Eze. Let's have it go around, and then let's sit down and now say, this is how we want to operate going forward. You don't change the rules of a game midstream. Maybe a penalty has been, I have duly earned a penalty, I'm about to score. You say, wait a minute. Pushing somebody inside the 18-yard box, should it still be a penalty? No, from now we change it. It's only when you hack him down, not just an ordinary push. This is something you agree to before the game starts, and not when I've already earned, and I'm now standing before the goalkeeper to just shove the ball inside the net. That's the position of the Southeast today.
Mr. Eze, thank you so much for speaking with us. Thank you for your time today.
My pleasure.
That's NewsNight today. Thanks for watching. We do enjoy hearing from you about the issues raised during the conversation. Our social media handles through which you can reach us are on your screen. You can always listen to NewsNight via our podcast. It's on channelstv.com/podcast. I'm Ladi Akeredoluale. Goodbye.